Jesus lives in me. I ain't got time for you, devil. Don't waste your time on me. I ain't got time for you, devil, 'cause Jesus lives in me. Well, I said the devil is a liar, and the truth he cannot tell. So when he says he's got you, just send him back to hell. Well, Jesus whipped the devil. Well, he showed him who was boss. He got the keys of death, hell, and the grave, and he says 2 foot you've lost. But the devil's not too smart, you know, he shows up at every turn. But I just smile and go on by, 'cause the devil never learns. I ain't got time for you, devil. Don't waste your time on me. I ain't got time for you, devil, 'cause Jesus lives in me. I ain't got time for you, devil. Don't waste your time on me. I ain't got time for you, devil, 'cause Jesus lives in me. I ain't got time for you, devil, 'cause Jesus lives in me. Oh yeah, ain't it just great that God gave us the Holy Spirit? Right now, I'm going to introduce Drew Sams. He's going to tell a little bit about the history of CMA.
All honor and praise to Jesus Christ, who saves us and keeps us. Years ago, back in the very early 70s, some of you may remember, motorcycling was beginning to grow. Hondas and other motorcycles from the Orient were coming in, and Honda even had an advertisement that said you meet the nicest people on a Honda. And motorcycling was beginning to grow in the events that took place. All of the rallies were growing and becoming large, but there was no ministry unto the people. But the Lord changed all of that. The Lord chose a man. That man was a hard-working pastor and evangelist in western Arkansas. The Lord put his finger on that man. The man didn't know for several years. The Lord was beginning to work in his life. The man and his son were beginning to grow somewhat distant because the pastor was gone all the time. Pastor decided my son is about 16, able to drive now. Said, I need to slow down my schedule, take some time to bond with my son and family. He said, my son loves motorcycles. He's had off-road motorcycles. I think I know what I'll do. I'll get 2 road motorcycles. I think there were 350 Hondas, or maybe there were 450 Hondas, Herb said. And together they began to ride. Interesting, though, the Lord chose a man to start a ministry of motorcyclists who was a pastor and evangelist, but he was not a motorcyclist. And Herb bought those 2 motorcycles. He went home, put his up on the center stand in the garage, and there with the wheel up off the surface, he operated that motorcycle for a half hour like that to learn how to operate a motorcycle. He and his son began to ride locally in the mountains around the area, then further, and then he took some time off. They went across country around the west coast and back, and this had the wonderful effect of bonding the 2 of them together, father and son. But he didn't know at the time that the Lord was using all of these events for several years, about 3 years, to open his eyes when they would go to motorcycle events, large rallies in Texas and Oklahoma, and what he would see there would be thousands, even tens of thousands of motorcyclists out there, but there was no one to minister to them. And he said it was like looking on the fields that are white unto harvest, but where are the reapers? There was no one to reap in the harvest. And that burdened his heart for several years. He'd go back home, tell his pastor friends, somebody needs to start a ministry to motorcyclists. They, oh yeah, sure they do. But nobody did. And finally the Lord pointed his finger and said, Herb, you're the man. And Herb realized that God was calling him, and he was so convicted about it that like Abraham, like other great old men of the Bible that stepped out on faith, Herb stepped out on faith. He talked with his wife. She agreed, let's try it for a year. And he announced the formation of a new ministry, the Christian Motorcyclist Association, which meant that he gave up his church, gave up the security, anything else he had like that, had no income, so he began advertising in magazines, these little small classified ads around the country in motorcycle magazines, and people would pick up on that and they'd send in their application, become a member, and the members then were supposed to be simply those who would support in finances and prayer the ministry of one man on a motorcycle. And thus it began. One man on a motorcycle going around to the events, and then his wife began to ride with him on that small motorcycle across country. And he said, Lord, I don't know how to minister to motorcyclists. So he said, well, I'll go. And he learned. And he'd go, and some of these people who hated God and motorcycle and Christians would come up and angrily ask him, what are you doing here at this rally? He said, I came here to tell you about Jesus. And by the end of the rally, some of those people had begun to change and had begun to accept him. And then there was the need for more. And so he brought along a friend in the ministry to be a second evangelist. And then there were need for more evangelists. And by now, the membership was growing across the country, people who would support in prayer and finances support this ministry. The ministry is growing. Something he had never expected was the formation of chapters, but they just sort of naturally began. Where I was living in Arizona, in Bethany Bible Church there were a number of fellows there who had seen the ads. They had become members. I became a member in January 1976. And as members, we just sort of naturally formed a group together, and it became a chapter. And we just met in somebody's home, and it would take monthly rides and all over Arizona, and things just began to grow like that. And then I went off into ministry elsewhere, and the ministry continued to grow, and I had very little contact with it, except through a chapter we did form in Alaska. And then when I retired from ministry and came back down stateside, a chapter was formed here in this area, first in Statesville and moved to Salisbury. But we see through all of this, it began with God choosing a man. That man was obedient to God, stepped out not knowing where he was going or how it would work. He began a ministry that now has multiplied across the country, across Canada, parts of Africa, South America, other parts of the world, with the main purpose of taking ministry out to motorcyclists where they are. And so, in effect, what this amounts to is when CMAers go out to events, these people aren't going to come into church. You know that, I know that. We take church to them. And that's why we are out there. So consider and think about this as missions to motorcyclists. That's what this is. Ralph, come on up. Thank you for having us over tonight. And that's, in brief, the history of Christian Motorcyclist Association.
Thank you, Drew, for that history lesson in the CMA. It's awesome what has gone on in the CMA since its inception back in the early 70s. The CMA now is 130, 140,000 strong. It's not just national, it's international. We cover 30 different countries now. But anyway, I come up to give a little testimony of what the Lord done for me, how he got me to where I'm at today. I started out as a youngster. My family was in church, out of church, in church, out of church. About 14, 15 years old, I finally figured out that you should be in church. We lived close enough to a church I could walk to a church, so I went to church. Then a couple years later, I met my lovely wife here. She went to church. We was happy. She went to a different denomination than I did, but everything was fine with me and her. We had a great time. And along the way, we kind of drifted away from the